How's it going, lads and lasses? It's me, Mugen, back at you with another manga video. Today is a very different kind of manga video because we will be talking about a manga and one of its anime adaptations and talking about which one does the story more justice. So the manga we'll be talking about today is Go Nagai's Devilman, and the adaptation is Devilman Crybaby by Netflix. Now, to preface this, I saw Devilman Crybaby when it first came out. I saw it back in 2018, and I only just started reading Devilman, the manga, this past week. And having just finished it, I thought it'd be a cool idea to look at how they're similar. Now, why did I choose Crybaby first of all? Because I'm sure there are some people who are going like, Amon, the Devilman side, Devilman is a good OVA. And I did look at a lot. I actually watched the OVA, and I did watch quite a few episodes of the original 1970s anime of Devilman. And from everything that I could read and muster in the past 2 days in terms of research, gave me the inclination that Devilman Crybaby was by most people unanimously the closest in source material and adaptation. So today I'm just going to be talking about my thoughts on what I think the manga does well, what I think the anime does well, and sum up which one I think I might prefer. This is purely just my opinion, so please tell me what you think in the comments, because I know that this is probably something that people debate a lot in terms of sign-in manga and also sign-in shows. But for those who have not seen Devilman or have read the manga at all, I'm going to give you spoilers ahead for a lot of different Devilman adaptations, media. If you haven't read or seen it, you should probably go read or see it. That being said, let's continue. So basic premise, of course. Akira Fudo is a high school Japanese kid who is then given the power of the Devilman, specifically the Devil Warrior Amon, tries to possess Akira, but unfortunately, because Akira's heart is so human and strong, he is able to overcome it and capture the body of Amon while still retaining his soul and his heart as a human, thus giving him the unanimous name of Devilman. Like I said before, I first watched the Devilman Crybaby anime. And when I first watched it, I had no preconceptions of what it was about. I just knew that this guy became a devil. Slowly, I was very enamored by what it was able to do. I had never really seen this kind of hardcore anime before. I had never seen an art style like it, which we'll get to later. But all in all, I thought it was something very unique and was very good at grabbing your attention, especially with the conundrums, or I guess in other words, the fucked up things that Akira has to go through. That's the most basic synopsis, of course. We'll get into more of the story stuff. When I read the manga, I knew of certain events that happened in the manga. When you're reading through Devilman as opposed to watching Crybaby, there are some things that you pick up in terms of how they set up Akira as a character. They set him up as, the Crybaby character. He would never hurt a fly. And then, of course, when coming into contact with the Devil Warrior Amon, his personality and his bloodlust to fight suddenly surges. Now, this is where I think the story and the characters slightly differ in terms of what Go Nagai wrote and what the adaptation achieved. So Akira, before he becomes Devilman, is very much a crybaby. He sees people in pain and he can't help but cry. It's something of a weak look to others. Some people think he's pathetic for crying so easily. And only after becoming Devilman does he have this much more angry, outlandish look on other people. He's able to talk more roughly. It's almost like he went through some puberty stages. One thing I think that is cool that the anime did is that despite Akira now having a bit more confidence in doing things that are very rebellious, such as watching porn in the AV room, walking around, not really caring about what other people think, or of course just being a bit more vulgar and a bit more aggressive with other people. What they do in the Devilman manga originally is just have Akira be a bit more aggressive from the get-go, but he doesn't retain as much emotion for other people besides the people he cares about, which is of course Miki and Ryo. In the anime, I think they do it a lot better because it doesn't feel like he changes fundamentally. He gains more sides to his character as being aggressive and also bloodthirsty and having the will to fight, but he never stops being empathic towards other characters, especially villains. There are moments where it feels like Akira hasn't changed a bit. He more just grew as his role as Devilman, and finding that it's harder for him to make these hard choices. I found that much more interesting in the anime adaptation. That being said, of course, in the manga, he hasn't shown much more empathy towards villains, mostly just the two major characters and of course the Mikimura family, which took care of him most of his life. But this is something that I found very unique, is that Akira grew to become the crybaby he was at the start over the course of the manga, whereas Akira slowly and never really changed being the crybaby he always was before he became a Devilman. I thought that was something that was a bit unique. I mean, they both achieved the same goal at the end, so that's not really too much different. I will say as well, with Akira's character in the manga, it does feel like he just becomes more attractive and interesting when suddenly he's very violent and swearing. The dialogue in the manga can be very out there because suddenly characters will be very cutesy, but then they'll just start swearing like they're from an MA15 plus Netflix show. In terms of other characters, Ryo is much more aggressive in the anime adaptation. In so many other ways, he's much more bloodthirsty. I feel like Ryo in the manga definitely makes it feel like he has better intentions for the characters and the world as a whole, especially when trying to make sure that Akira is safe and he's trying to stop demons from killing people. Ryo is also put into more intense situations where he actually needs to use his abilities as a human to just survive. His outbursts of anger and violence are somewhat a hint towards his final transformation and who he really is. While may seem very outlandish, I actually preferred it more in the manga as opposed to the anime, especially his slow revelation to becoming Satan. In the anime adaptation, it does feel kind of out of nowhere. There were some hints, but it didn't feel like it was really building up. It was very much a, oh, okay, you're Satan? Cool, I guess, man, sure. Whereas in the manga, in my opinion, it feels like it was slowly building up. It's like, oh, why is it that I'm predicting all these things and they're actually happening? How did I predict everything so accurately? Goes back to his family home. The plaster mold of the demon is fake. The books of his father are gone. The photos of him aren't him. It's of a different Ryo, a Ryo that he took the name of. But then when, of course, he comes into contact with the demons and then realizes who he really is, it does feel extremely worth it of he is Satan. And that's when it really does genuinely feel worth it. These things were set up from the beginning. You could argue Crybaby does the same thing, but I would say it does it in a less subtle tone. And it definitely makes it feel like Ryo has more of an arc, especially because he is worried for Akira. Ryo in Crybaby doesn't feel as much that he cares for Akira at all. Kind of makes it feel like he's slowly changing him, but on the surface level, I don't think we get many visual indications except at the end, which I think is the whole point. Ryo, in my opinion, manga is probably a bit more king. Where the manga probably fails in terms of characters, I'd say Miki is kind of weak, and I say kinda, I mean really weak in the manga. In the manga at the start, when we meet the delinquents, there is a instance in where she's able to defend herself to an extent from the delinquents. She calls her that, you'll see why they call me Miki Hands. That was kind of cool. It's like, oh yeah, this is for the 70s. This is a very strong female character. And then immediately she needs Akira's help because she's not going to be able to fight them off. Then of course she comes back and she's got a knife, which is literally insane. She now has an actual knife to use to defend. And then Akira steps up and goes like, don't worry, I got this. And that's when she finds him so attractive, is when he's a man, when he stands up and he's ready to kick ass. And she chucks away the knife. Suddenly she's all helpless. And I thought it was a bit more interesting that she was already ready to do these things on her own, ready to fight for herself immediately. I thought it was also kind of weird because I found in the adaptation it was a bit more interesting and a bit more human of her to like that Akira, while he had changed, still cared about the people around him. While she thought it was somewhat silly at how easily he would cry for others suffering, she felt like it was something that she also admired about him, and I think she also reminds him in the adaptation. But in the manga, not so much. She does find him much more attractive when he's less attentive to her. He's more aggressive as a male. Yeah, it's a very like toxic masculinity kind of thing going on there. Not that it ruins the manga, but it devalues her character, in my opinion. She makes her less interesting, which then kind of makes the death at the end less impactful. That being said, the death in the end in the manga and in the anime, pretty much one-to-one, I'd say pretty fucked up. They do things differently with the Mikimura family in terms of how they die. Miki deals with that, but then of course she dies in the house assault along with a bunch of other people. The differences aren't too major. I do remember looking at the OVA and thinking that one was pretty messed up. I actually think out of all of them, the OVA did something really, really cool that Crybaby and the manga didn't do. The manga and Crybaby basically do it one-to-one in terms of when Akira finds that these people have absolutely massacred the Mikimura family and also Miki. That and all is a terrifying scene presented in both formats. Humanless creatures, these deformed shadows and silhouettes that are chanting and laughing and raving that they defeated and they killed the witch Miki. Very fucked up. But one thing that I noticed about the OVA is that it presented it in a much more terrifying format compared to Crybaby, especially in animation. In Crybaby, the assault on the house is treated like an escalating situation. It's getting worse and worse. Miki just needs to get away, and then of course by the last frame she can't get away. She can't run fast enough, which is the shame, and you're like, oh no, God, that didn't work. The Devilman OVA, I will say, while it isn't a great adaptation, that scene in how they represent the massacre is much more impactful from both ends. The Mikimura family that are at home is just Tare and Miki, just like in the manga. And in the manga, Tare runs off somewhere, and when Miki's cornered by all the people in the house, one of them walks in with the head of Tare. Awful, right? Fucked up. Don't see that in Crybaby. In the OVA, they do that, but the way they do it is that they're in separate rooms in the house and they see the news that mum and dad are taken by the demon core and Akira's in trouble, they need help. Tare runs out of the room, and as soon as he runs down the hallway, he's shot in the head with an arrow, and his head is taken off by these people who are hiding in the rooms. As soon as Miki walks out of the room to try and see where they are, they hide back in. The house is shown completely empty, except for one shot where someone runs by and the quickest violin piece just plays. I was getting so scared just by watching this OVA from that one scene, and she eventually does find his body decapitated, just like in the manga. And then it cuts away just before one of them is about to slice her, because you're not sure if she does get away or not, because you think, surely. And then when Akira sees them, it's exactly the same. All three, manga, Crybaby, and the OVA. But what the OVA does is really cool, is that instead of showing you him go nuts and destroy everything and burn it all down, what they do is they show him deal with what he's seeing, and then right as he screams, it cuts to black. It cuts him off, audio and everything. And then when it cuts back, everyone's dead. That, I think, is something that could have and should have probably been in the Crybaby, because it felt so shocking, is that he doesn't even know what he did in that moment of snapping. And I think the other two do it perfectly. The panels show him carrying the head and burning it all down is incredible, and same with Crybaby. The way in which Akira just loses it and just deems that humanity's not worth saving anymore, especially when the one person he cared about the most is gone, is pretty impactful regardless. It's just a personal preference of mine that I thought I'd share with you guys. Those are the basic major characters I want to talk about. All the other characters aside, and Crybaby does include characters to be a bit more major, specifically Miko. Miko, of course, in the manga, she's a side character. She barely appears. She's just another Devilman character that you later find out when Akira is recruiting the Devilman army. I like how in Crybaby they made her a much more central character. Crybaby does a better job of taking every single side character and giving them, even just through one episode, the smallest arc. The manga does have time for it, but it also just decides not to. The manga does take its time, especially scenes between Akira and Ryo, where they take so long, just exposition. And they do make the panels interesting enough that you're like, whoa, this is some heavy shit that they're talking about. But it's something that does devalue time that you could have had learning and caring about other characters, so that when they do die, it's a bit more impactful to the viewer especially. So when we're getting to side characters, I think Crybaby definitely has it in spades. Spending more time with other characters and still being able to do the exact same things for Ryo and Akira in the manga, in terms of exploring their characters and exploring what it is that they're trying to sort out about who they are and what they do. It does it so well. Like, Miko is so much more interesting. Miki is interesting. The delinquents are a lot more interesting, and especially they make one of the delinquents one of the pillagers at the end who kills the Mikimura family, or kills Miki specifically. Imagine if the delinquents did that in the manga, you'd be even more pissed off. You'd be like, you fucking betrayed us. So I think that Crybaby definitely does that in terms of utilizing more characters. That tends to be because of running time. You need to fill more time as opposed to filling pages. So exposition is a lot more in the manga. That being said, there is some exposition that isn't in Crybaby. You don't get the more specifics of, even visually, how did the demons just return out of nowhere? Were they in the ice? Were they not? They don't really talk about it, to my memory as well. I don't remember them talking about it at all in Crybaby. They don't devolve too much into the background of there being an army from heaven and one from hell that battled it out thousands of years ago. They're not setting the stones to the reveal of Satan, which is also, I think, why it's not that interesting. Xenon is not really present in Crybaby either. So I'd say the manga does a lot better world building. But of course, you have themes going on with both, right? It's hard to talk about all of them. So I'm just going to talk about some of the ones I think are really cool. Crybaby definitely has a much more modern theme in terms of talking about being an other or being something that is different from the modern person, whether you're gay, straight, trans, all these different things that make you someone else. The persecution of people like that still rings true with the idea of persecuting people who are different or being of a different minority. The way they talk about it in the manga is specifically about ethnicity, and they do it in Crybaby as well, but they also include gender factions in terms of what part of the LGBT plus community are you a part of. That's an other, therefore it is deemed similar to demons, because if you're talking to someone who is different from you, therefore they must be a demon, therefore must be, of course, one in disguise. But what I think Crybaby does well is makes it feel much more realistic in terms of seeing just people in SWAT gear, just herding people around and trying to kill people who are demons on the street, and it makes it feel much more hopeless because it feels so real, especially when they're persecuting people just because they look different, whether it be how they're dressed or styled or even the color of their skin. It's like obviously ahead of its time, not just in themes and character and also the content. I did a bit of research. Go Nagai was heavily criticized by PTA meetings for like parent teachers in schools because Devilman was a shonen. For shonen, they're technically for young boys. Seinen, I don't think really was a thing at the time. So when he was making stuff, people worried that he was trying to engage kids in like, yes, orgy, sex, drugs, demons, murdering, killing. These are the things that make you an adult. And I think that's what's cool about Crybaby is they take that kind of idea that people are worried of what it's going to do to you and show that, well, kids are already going to be going through puberty around this time. These are the things they're already looking up on their own, and it's the things that adults are going to be reading in their own time. So in a way, I thought it was really cool how the anime Crybaby was able to replicate that and recontextualize it for a modern audience and still understand that it's still a prevalent issue of censorship, the way in which hypocrisy works, of people being like, you can't show that, that's messed up, this is not for people, but then in humanity's own actions do worse things or consume worse things than what's made for a younger audience. I thought it was very interesting, but we need to start getting to some of the other stuff. Going back to the idea of the other, I've never really seen many other stories do the other as well as Devilman does. Specifically, if you don't really know, the idea of the other is this social construct that as long as there are two groups, there will always be an other of people, whether it be two people who live in two different households, or a street versus another street, or a town versus another town, or a country versus another country, or a planet versus another planet. There will always be an other that people will want to deem as the separate. It goes into a lot of other theories of war, but just to break it down, essentially groups of people cannot unite commonly unless there is an other. You can only become friends with your enemy unless there is a third entity. There must be an other that makes you go, oh, we're not different, they're different. And then if you find a fourth one, then you can go to the third one and say, oh, us three are not different, we're the same. That's the other. But I think what Crybaby and the manga do incredibly is really tell you from the get-go, this is how it's going to go. This is what humanity's done. And you have to think, surely not. And I think you want to believe with Akira, surely humanity wouldn't do this. But of course they do, because humanity has proven itself in history to do that same thing again and again. And there is that little small bit of hope that maybe they won't. And there are those who don't. Miki doesn't do it. Akira doesn't do it. Akira does feel like humanity isn't worth saving unless it's for one person he cares about. And same goes for Rio when it's Akira who he cares about and doesn't really give a shit about anyone else in humanity, which is kind of a contradiction in terms of giving a shit. Hello, Future Mugen here, editing this video you're watching right now. One theme I forgot to mention when it comes to paranoia and Go Nagai's writing is that during the 70s, during the time of the Cold War, you can see he was heavily inspired by the events transpiring around war and also the fear of communism in Japan. Trying to figure out if your neighbor is a communist or a demon was a heavy topic in a lot of other different countries. So you can see how that definitely inspired the paranoia, especially fed by the media in all countries, not just Japan, around the time of the 70s. Is your neighbor a communist? Are they trying to tell you about how communism works and destroy democracy? These are the things that the paranoia feeds into, especially in Devilman. Both versions, Crybaby and the manga, when going about how your neighbors could be demons. Watch how they act differently. The media kind of feeds the idea to the populace of how you can then, in turn, despise your neighbor just because of how they act different based on what the overwhelming majority are telling you. This is one of the things that they heavily show in Crybaby and the manga, through newspaper, television, and then in social media, especially in Crybaby, which is why it works so well and it's so timeless. Just something I felt like I had to mention because it was so important. I can't believe I forgot it. Anyway, back to the video. A lot of people talk about how they feel like the ending of Crybaby in the manga is nihilistic because by the end, Akira is dead, the world is destroyed, and they're the only two beings left on the planet. While Rio gave him the power of Amon just so that he could survive the coming apocalypse, he didn't realize that he would oppose him for something and people that he himself didn't even know. And Rio couldn't really understand that. And then realizing that the only person that he cared about is now dead because of him, he's just repeated a cycle that he was hoping to deconstruct as being Satan. And a lot of people find it very nihilistic and messed up. And I think it's, honestly, it is poetry in a sense, having Satan cry over a human. Because Satan in all kinds of literature never cares about humans and thinks they're the spawn, they're the worms and insects of the earth. Having the last panel be literally Satan crying over the body of a friend, a human friend, that's pretty powerful. And while I think it is nihilistic in a lot of ways that there is no hope, that humanity did this to themselves, even though demons gave them a push, humanity carried that shit all the rest of the way. That is true, but you have to remember that in that last panel, especially in Crybaby, light comes from the stars and rebuilds the earth. And we don't know if it's the earth we know or if it's just restarting it all over again. But you have to realize that it never really ends, that there is still a hope that things could be different. You just have to go again and again and again until someone, maybe one or two, can change it. And that's what I took away from it. I think that's maybe what they're trying to say, because in the end, it is a very nihilistic story and it's very dark and very brutal and very crude. But I think those kind of stories give you perspective on how important things that involve hope are. If you only had hope and only believed that everything would work out from the get-go, then things are going to go wrong. But then if you are dealing with the things that are going wrong, and you're dealing with the tragedies that are befalling you, but you're still holding out that things could just be 1 inch better, that inch can grow to a centimeter and continue and evolve into an entire planet of hope, which I think is cool by the end of Crybaby, especially with the new reformed Earth. And then in the last panel of the manga, seeing the angels come from heaven to either help or punish Satan. Don't really know. It's kind of vague in that sense. So I think all in all, the story can be very dark and people can find it very full on and a bit too much. Even in a lot of the anime adaptations, there was stuff that I'm saying like, okay, this is a bit much. Akira, this is not really very moral. This is very edgelord. You know, it's maximum level edgelord. Those would be my only criticisms of the manga and Crybaby, is that they go so far to make you feel like everything is so disgustingly messed up in terms of sin, whether it be sex, murder, violence, drugs, alcohol, all these things mixed up together to create this cesspool of humanity, and the worst of humanity are all these things kind of mixed together. I think they do that really well. It almost goes too far that it makes me realize it so much more. And I think that's the point. I should want to look away. Going down to visually things, I gotta say, for the manga and the anime, especially Crybaby, Crybaby is a very unique art style, animation style. And this is where I think Crybaby and the manga kind of meet neck and neck. The manga is well drawn, especially for the 70s, of course, and it still has that kind of cutesy Astro Boy vibe to it. I think it's because at the time, style was just coming into how you could draw your characters, so a lot of the characters felt like the same. But I will say about the manga is that Go Nagai, when he wants to, he takes it to another level and he draws the most intensely scribbled pages of the worst of humanity. He also uses negative space really well. I think that he does a cool thing in this one panel where he has Akira say to the reader that now you've gone through my journey of hell, you're joining me the rest of the way. You are not exempt from what happens for the rest of the story. And then he slowly fades into the darkness. The way he uses negative space is so cool, especially in how he uses the panels. And you can definitely see, if you're a Berserk fan, you can definitely see some influence that Miura took from Go Nagai, because there are these 3 panels, and I think you've probably seen them everywhere if you typed in Berserk and Devilman. You'll see these inspirations that they've got together of how these 2 characters deal with rage and how they deal with their impulses. Akira goes through so much bloodshed, it's pretty much like Guts, you know. Crybaby does an animation style in a similar way where the animation is so simple and cartoony and goofy. It makes all the awful things that much more horrendous because the animation's so fluid. Just ripping off the head of a character, it just seems like they're elastic. You know, it's fucked up, it's disgusting. But then it's also comedic, and I think Devilman, the original manga, does try to be very comedic a lot of times. Sometimes it feels a bit ridiculous because it's a shonen, it's for young kids. It's literally a scene where Taro just runs away and there's piss everywhere. It was somewhat funny, but at the same time, I'm just like, this is kind of stupid. And the same can be said with Crybaby. There's some panels where it's like, what is this frame? What is Akira doing? And the way they run is so fucking funny. And I get it makes sense in the story, but it's just like, I think they meet neck and neck in terms of what is well drawn and what looks kind of stupid. I will say that Go Nagai does draw different characters well, and he draws the devils really well, especially in Crybaby. They're drawn very well. But I gotta say, the Crybaby character designs are a bit more nuanced in that characters do feel different. Go Nagai does feel like the delinquents are just badly drawn characters because they're meant to be idiots, so they're gonna look like and drawn like apes. I thought it was kind of boring. But then also you have characters who look just like Akira. Akira and Ryo just look so similar. And even Miki looks similar to Akira. They basically look like siblings. I think the artwork really flourishes when the action's happening and everything's moving. When characters are standing still, it's pretty basic. I'll say it. It's probably a hot take of mine, but I feel like just in a modern context, looking back, it's not fun to read or look at, especially when characters are, you know, doing very comic booky moments where they're like saying, I'll get you Amon, or I'll get you Xenon, and they've got these arms that are like pipes, and I think the designs could have been more interesting. You know, the same with the kids. All the kids are drawn the same, and Tare only looks different when he's dead. That's the only time he's drawn different, is because obviously the vibe has to be changed. But funny enough, that's where they meet neck and neck. They have the best parts and the worst parts of their own animation and their own artwork. They kind of do some things better, but then the other one picks it up, and the other one picks up the slack of the other one. So in a way, they kind of work well together. It's like reading it and watching it together makes you feel like where one fails, the other succeeds, and where one succeeds, the other one fails. But seriously, the panels are great, and I think that they really do evoke this vibe that Crybaby, I wish evoked more. I wish Crybaby had more subtle moments. They do, of course, after Miki's death, where it's just this one shot of Akira driving on the motorbike with her. I think that's so special. And they have moments like that, of course, with Akira in the manga. They both use these moments where they have silence and just let the image speak for themselves. But I think the manga could do more of it, especially when there wasn't just walls of text and exposition coming through. This video is already getting a bit long, so I'm just going to sum it up right now because I did not think I would be talking for this long about the two. The question was, which one's better? Is the anime actually better than the manga? Does it succeed? I will say, Crybaby most definitely does do the things that I think Go Nagai wanted to do in the 70s. It achieves the things and the themes, the images, and the very controversial content that he probably couldn't have put in anyway, even if he did and got away with it. I think it does it better in terms of showing you those very confronting things, especially in a modern context. It being a Netflix adaptation, there aren't any real barriers that they have to stand behind. They have a lot more freedom, and of course they had said that they want to do the themes justice. They want to do the things that Go Nagai couldn't do in his original text, and I think you can see that. Now, does that make it better? Not necessarily, because there are some things that are very subtle about not showing us sexual things or too violent things in the manga. in a way, the manga still gets across those themes without having to do more messed up images. In a way, the manga holding back some of the things that it shows you makes you feel like it's more terrifying. When you don't see a character get torn apart, or when you don't see one of your favorite characters be destroyed in such a horrific way, is almost as terrifying as seeing it, because your thoughts and your imagination of what could have happened feels just as worse. But I think the manga has its own strengths of not showing you things, whereas the anime does. So all in all, what's the answer? They're exactly the same. It is pretty much not a one-to-one source material adaptation, but it does its own thing so well. Reading one and watching the other, in my opinion, gives you the exact same outcome. They just do things differently that give you a bit of flavor. If you want things that are a bit more vulgar and intensely visual, then the anime will be your go-to, because it's going to show you things that the manga can't show you, and it's going to put you in a more modern context. The manga does things in a really subtle way with its panels and what it censors and what it does show you, and how it slowly drip feeds the story to you, that I think the anime stumbles with. But that's what I think is really cool about the story of Devilman, is that this adaptation picks up the slack of the manga because it was ahead of its time. But then watching the anime makes you look back on the manga and appreciate how well it was done for its time. They equally balance each other out. So if you want the full Devilman experience, in my opinion, just do both. Watch one and then read the other, in whatever order, because I did one that was made in 2018, and then I read the manga that was made in the 70s, and I got the exact same outcome, and I was very happy with it. Also, if you don't believe that having watched one and read the other kind of makes the experience better, as I was reading this, I was listening to the Crybaby soundtrack. Kensuke Ushio is very good. He's made a lot of other stuff. I've seen A Silent Voice, and that's a really good soundtrack, but it's almost like he was reading the manga when he was making the music, and he didn't even look at Crybaby, because it works so well when you read it. When you read the manga and you're listening to a modern soundtrack of like techno and night synth, it's actually really good. I'm surprised how well they actually match visually. Oh no, I think Devilman's a classic. It's not perfect in any means, and the anime adaptation isn't like the best anime adaptation ever known to man. I'd say it's far from it. But together, they create the perfect viewing and reading experience of the Devilman story. So yeah, that's my opinion. That's what I think. I could be giving so many hot takes, but I don't really care much. I appreciate you've got to the end. I'm sure this may be a long video. God, I hope not. I have so much to edit already. But thank you for sticking around if you did. Please let me know what you think of Devilman. Also, what else should I read? I've already gotten so many comments of what I should read. The list is big. It's gotten even bigger, which is cool. Cool? I think it's cool. I will say this probably won't be another manga video for maybe a couple weeks, because I am currently reading Vinland Saga, as it being the most commented thing I've gotten. So that's going to be on the back burner for a while. So until then, we'll probably have some gameplay and movie videos until then. So if you're keen to see those, you should subscribe, because that's what we do here. We do movies, manga, media, all that related. Again, thank you for watching. My name's Mugen, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.